Today, we're going over the most horrifying last words ever spoken by kings and queens, the final sentences that left royal mouths in the last few seconds before a blade, a bullet, or a fever finished the job. And I don't mean the polished little speeches about God and honor that got cleaned up for the history books. I'm talking about a teenage queen feeling around blindfolded for the block that's about to take her head, a king screaming about rivers of blood as he dies, and a woman apologizing to the man who is seconds away from dropping a blade through her neck. Let's get into it. Number 1. Lady Jane Grey. The Queen Who Couldn't Find the Block. It's the 12th of February, 1554, and a 17-year-old girl is standing on a low wooden scaffold on Tower Green, inside the Tower of London. A few months earlier, she was Queen of England. She held the throne for exactly 9 days. She was one of the most educated people in the entire country. A girl who read Greek and Latin for fun, and once said she'd rather sit with a book by Plato than go hunting with everyone else. And now she's been brought out to a patch of straw to have her head removed. She's already given a short, steady speech to the crowd, admitting that agreeing to take the crown was unlawful, and washing her hands of it in front of God and everyone watching. She's handed her gloves and her prayer book to the people around her. She's recited a psalm. And now she ties a blindfold over her own eyes because she asked the executioner to do it quickly and she does not want to watch the axe come down. She kneels and reaches out for the wooden block. It isn't there. Her hands are reaching into empty air, patting at nothing, and in front of around 1,000 silent, staring people, the composure of this famously calm, famously clever girl just cracks. She says out loud, "What shall I do? Where is it?" That's it. A blindfolded teenager on her knees in the straw, asking the crowd to help her find the thing they're about to behead her on. A bystander, the lieutenant of the tower, steps in and guides her hands onto the block. And here's the thing about Jane. She never wanted any of this. After the death of the teenage King Edward VI, a circle of ambitious relatives, including her own father and father-in-law, shoved her onto the throne to keep Edward's Catholic half-sister, Mary Tudor, off it. The plan fell apart in 9 days. Mary took the crown, and at first she actually seemed inclined to let Jane live, to keep her locked up but breathing. What sealed Jane's death was her own father, who a few months later threw himself into a rebellion against Mary, and in doing so signed his daughter's death warrant for her. That's like being handed the keys to an entire country for less time than a modern free trial, getting deposed, and then being executed months later over something your dad did. One of the women weeping on that scaffold beside her had reportedly been Jane's nursemaid when she was a baby. Once a stranger's hands found the block for her, Jane steadied herself, laid her neck down, and spoke her actual last words. "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." The only hands she truly needed in that moment belonged to a man she couldn't see, aiming her at the axe. Number 2. Anne Boleyn, the queen who used her last breath to compliment the man who was killing her. It's the 19th of May, 1536, 18 years before Jane Grey will kneel on that same ground, and around 2,000 people are packed into the Tower of London to watch a Queen of England die. This is Anne Boleyn, the woman Henry VIII tore England away from the Catholic Church to marry, the mother of a not-quite 3-year-old daughter named Elizabeth, who will one day become one of the greatest monarchs in English history. Right now, though, Anne's fall has been almost unbelievably fast. 3 weeks earlier, she was sitting at a royal tournament when Henry abruptly stood up and walked out without a word to her. She never saw him again. In between came arrests, a court musician's confession dragged out under pressure, and a trial with a foregone conclusion. She climbs the scaffold in a dark gown, calm, and gives her final speech. It's gracious. She doesn't accuse anyone. She doesn't protest her innocence, even though the charges, adultery with multiple men, incest with her own brother George, and plotting to kill the king, were almost certainly manufactured to clear Henry's path to wife number 3. Instead, she tells the crowd that Henry has always been a good and gentle lord to her, that a gentler or more merciful prince never existed, and she asks God to save the king and grant him a long reign. She is, with minutes left to live, standing on the platform built for her own execution, publicly praising the husband who invented a case to behead her. And here's where it gets genuinely strange. Henry had decided not to use the clumsy English axe, which sometimes took 3 or 4 hacks to finish the job. He paid to import an expert swordsman all the way from Calais, in France, specifically because a sword could do it cleanly in a single stroke. There was no block at all. Anne knelt upright, in the French style, and prayed aloud over and over, "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesus, receive my soul." And then, by the traditional account, the swordsman did something quietly merciful and quietly horrifying at the same time. To keep her from seeing the blade, he called out for someone to hand him his sword, so that she would turn her head toward the voice. The sword was already in his hand. He swung from the other side and took her head in one stroke while she was looking the wrong way. Days earlier, she'd actually managed to joke about her own beheading to her jailer, putting her hands around her throat and laughing that the executioner would have an easy time of it, because she had a little neck. After it was over, the men who had engineered her downfall, watching from below, realized that nobody had thought to prepare a coffin. Her ladies wrapped her body in an old wooden arrow chest and buried her under the floor of the Tower Chapel. Henry got engaged to Jane Seymour the very next morning and married her 11 days later. Number 3. King Charles IX of France, the king who heard a massacre in the sound of birds. It's the spring of 1574, in the castle of Vincennes just outside Paris, and a 23-year-old king is dying in his bed. He's been king of France since he was 10 years old, and his mother, Catherine de' Medici, has effectively run the country from behind him for almost the entire time. Right now he is soaked through with sweat, shaking, feverish, and he cannot stop talking about blood. 2 years earlier he gave an order. In August of 1572, Paris was crowded with Protestants, French Huguenots, who had come to the city for a royal wedding that was supposed to patch up decades of religious war. Instead, pushed by his mother and a panicking inner circle, Charles agreed to have the Huguenot leaders killed. It was meant to be a contained, surgical strike against a handful of men. It was anything but. The Paris mob caught the scent of it and exploded. This became the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. The Protestant leader Coligny was murdered and thrown out of a window into the street below. Ordinary Catholic Parisians hunted down their Protestant neighbors, men, women, and children, and threw so many bodies into the river that accounts say the Seine ran red. Around 3,000 people were slaughtered in Paris alone, and as the killing spread out into cities across France, over the following weeks, the death toll estimates climb into the tens of thousands. Charles issued an order to stop it the very next day. Nobody listened, and it apparently broke something inside him. He began having violent nightmares. According to accounts from the period, he watched a flock of crows settle onto the roof of the Louvre and became convinced that their cawing was the screaming of the people he'd helped to massacre. His health collapsed. Tuberculosis layered on top of a guilt that would not let him rest, and on his deathbed, he reportedly cried out about the streams of blood, the murders, the wicked counsel he had followed, insisting that the whole thing was on him. And here's where the accounts split, so I'll flag it honestly. His Protestant enemies spread a story that the king died sweating actual blood, oozing it out through his own skin. The man who had spilled so much of theirs finally drowning in his own. Historians treat that detail as almost certainly a legend, a piece of divine justice that's a little too poetic to be real. What is not in dispute is the tuberculosis, the guilt, and a young man genuinely falling to pieces over what he had put his name to. That's a 16th century guilty conscience turned all the way up until it physically kills you. He had worn the crown for 14 years and died at 23, convinced the birds on his roof had come for him personally. His mother buried him, and immediately went looking for the next son to install on the throne. Number 4. Marie Antoinette, the queen who said sorry to the man about to kill her. It's the 16th of October, 1793, and the most famous queen in Europe is being driven through the streets of Paris in an open wooden cart. Her hands are tied behind her back. Her hair has been hacked off short. She's wearing a plain white dress, and the crowds packed along the route are screaming insults at her the entire way. Her husband, King Louis XVI, had already been sent to the same blade 9 months earlier. And unlike him, she isn't even given a closed carriage to hide in. On the official paperwork, she isn't a queen at all anymore. She's prisoner number 280. She climbs the scaffold steps. Waiting up on the platform is the guillotine. In the square the revolutionaries were then calling the Place de la Révolution. She's 37 years old, though after months in a freezing cell, a sham trial, and the loss of nearly everyone she loved, she looks far older than that. Her trial had been a horror of its own. The prosecution had thrown in an accusation so vile, involving her young son, that she refused to even answer it, turning instead to the mothers in the room and asking them to picture it for themselves. And now, at the top of the scaffold, as she moves into position, she accidentally steps on her executioner's foot. The executioner is a man named Sanson, and her response is to apologize to him. "Pardon me, monsieur. I did not do it on purpose." Those are the last recorded words of Marie Antoinette. Not a curse. Not a grand final statement. Not a defense. An apology for stepping on the foot of the man who is about to drop a blade through her neck. And here's the detail that makes it land. That apology was pure reflex. This was a woman trained from early childhood, at the Austrian court and then the French one, to have flawless, automatic, bone-deep manners, and in the last few seconds of her life, with the blade hanging right there above her, those manners simply fired on their own. Earlier that same morning, when a priest urged her to have courage, she had replied that the moment her suffering was about to end was hardly the moment her courage would desert her. Then she apologized for a clumsy step and lost her head. After it was done, they left her body lying out on the grass at the cemetery, because the gravediggers had wandered off for lunch. For most of the past 2 centuries, she's been blamed for a heartless line she almost certainly never said: "Let them eat cake." The line she actually did say on the final day of her life was sorry. So there you have it. 4 crowns, 4 terrible exits, 4 sets of final words that nobody would ever have scripted. Lady Jane Grey, 17 years old, blindfolded and patting the straw, begging a crowd to help her find the block they were about to behead her on. Anne Boleyn, spending her last breath telling everyone what a merciful Prince Henry was, while his imported swordsman quietly got into position behind her. Charles IX, 23 and feverish, hearing an entire murdered city in the cawing of crows on his palace roof. And Marie Antoinette, hands bound behind her, stepping on a foot and saying, "Pardon me," to the man standing at the lever. It's strange. Which words history actually decides to keep? Not the rehearsed speeches, not the noble lines polished for the crowd, but the small, accidental, embarrassingly human ones. The panic, the compliment, the apology. The thing a person blurts out when they've forgotten, just for 1 second, that anyone is even listening. Maybe those were the real last words all along.